Are you tired of the quick fixes that promise transformation but leave you feeling more disconnected from your body than ever? Welcome to the Beyond Medicine Humanized Care for Women of Influence, where we go deeper than surface level solutions. I'm Dr. Maria, a functional integrative physician specializing in women's health, metabolic dysfunction, and hormone balance. Here, we will uncover the root cause of insulin resistance, PCOS, thyroid, and adrenal issues, and explore how trauma, stress, and anxiety impact your well being. Because your body is not a microwave, it deserves personalized, compassionate care that honors its complexity. Let's embark on a journey to reclaim your health one conversation at a time. And today with me, I have Michelle. She is the owner and founder of Present Moment Mindset, and she is a mental performance consultant. We will be diving today on the topic of positive body image throughout the female life cycle. So, welcome, Michelle, to the chat and to the show. How about if you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and introducing us to your world and what you do?
Thanks, Dr. Maria. I'm so excited to be here and to have met you and to support what you do. I think it's so important. I wish I'd met someone like you when I was much younger in my life. I am really excited to share with you about what I do. My path has been long and winding, a deep dig into learning about myself and then being able to just being passionate about being able to share what I learn with others from my own struggles that spurred me on my learning journey. So I'm a mental performance consultant, as you said. Some might call it a mental performance coach, and some people might just wonder what that is in general. So my background actually is that I have taught yoga, mindfulness, and meditation and practiced it myself for over 25 years and supported people to better understand themselves, to better love themselves and accept themselves, and to be able to manage the ups and downs of life. I found that I really loved working with high performing people or just high achieving people that love to do hard things. And so I went back to school as an adult and studied sport and performance psychology, got my master's in sport and performance psychology at University of St. Thomas. I was fortunate to study with an amazing mentor and director, Dr. Lenny Waite, who was a former Olympian and sports psychologist herself. And then began to really focus on taking what I was teaching in the yoga studio and the yoga classroom and taking it out of the classroom and really bringing it into the world, into kind of a non-traditional places and being able to teach it to athletes, performers, professionals, whether you're on the field, in the office, or on a bench somewhere. It doesn't matter. These things are things we can talk about and learn about anywhere and any time in our life. And so I really help people, especially when I'm working with like athletes and performers or entrepreneurs, for people to do hard things, to work, to bring their best self when it really counts. Whether you're under pressure like a deadline, or you're just in a high pressure kind of environment, or you're really trying to bring your best to a race. Maybe you're running a 5K or 10K or a marathon now, or maybe you're in a sport that you love and you want to be able to bring your best self whenever it really counts. So I help people learn how to just manage pressure, manage stress, and even things like the negative thoughts that show up over and over again and maybe send you into a spiral. And how do we deal with that? How do we be real with ourselves? How do we find the confidence we know is in there and really bring it to let it shine and let it help us shine in what we love to do? So I say I help people do what they love better and do it longer.
Oh, I love that. We do what you love and to do it longer because even if we age, that does not mean that necessarily we have to let go of things that we lost. We feel that we need to for, I think, multiple reasons. Talking about aging, and if we are born, there are a couple of things that automatically will happen. One, we will start to get old from the moment that we are born and we will age. There will be the time, especially if something doesn't happen and we lose our life before that. But there will be this time where our bodies will start to significantly change, where the physical appearance, we will be able to know, oh, okay, this person is older. And then perhaps this third person in terms of our appearance. So since we're going to dive into a positive body image throughout this life cycle. So from when a woman or a girl is born until she has her last breath. So before we talk a little bit about that, let's set the stage. How are we going to be talking when we talk about positive body image? How are we going to be talking about that? And what is it that you want the listeners to think when we are talking and using the word or the phrase positive body?
That's such a great question because I think the first thing that might pop into our head is that I have to feel like I love myself and I love every piece of my body all the time. And the thing I've probably been shouting from the rooftops for 25 years is that we have to be okay with whatever thoughts show up. And it is absolutely normal to have negative thoughts sometimes. It is absolutely normal to some days be feeling like you rock the world and some days be feeling like, oh my gosh, I look and feel so old, as you said, or I look and feel whatever. We have to be okay with whatever shows up. And positive body image is not really about always feeling great, but instead it's about learning to be real with yourself and learning how to support yourself whenever maybe those feelings are dipping and you know that it allows you to reframe things in a way that helps you stay motivated and helps you maintain your well-being.
Yeah, continue your well being. So there is this positive body image when we're talking about it, that we're thinking about our wellness. And I really like to emphasize we're not even talking necessarily about wellness just at the physical level, but I think that it's really important that we see it from this holistic perspective of who you are as a human being in all of your areas, right? So your mind, your spirit, soul, emotions, your thoughts. So these entire persona that you are. I think that's very important. And then let's also simply discuss or think of, what do we mean by life cycle? We have listeners that perhaps are not in the health field, and life cycle might be a word. But what do they mean by that? So, what are we talking about when we use the word life cycle?
Well, I think we're talking about the various stages and transitions that we go throughout our life. And that even though our body is changing and our experiences do change, so we have these different life stages that happen. But so life cycle kind of refers to this constant change that happens throughout our life, as you mentioned, from the time we're born, where we don't really pay attention to it until maybe we're a mid adult, then we start thinking about it more, but it's just another change. But I can't quote the research on this, but I know that I remember reading something about like interviewing people who were like in their 70s or older and what stage in their life did they resonate with the most. And they still talked about feeling like they were in their 20s. Mentally, that's where our brain kind of wraps it
Mm,
around of really relating to ourselves still as that young self. So when we're talking about life cycle, I think we're talking about this physical changes that happen, these stages of different things that change in our life. And yet at the same time, we're still who we are. That doesn't necessarily change. It just evolves and matures, but it's still who we are at our core.
yes. I like that you say we are still who we are in our core. So our core doesn't change. I think that also for me, when I think of like life cycle, again, coming from my background of like science and medicine, the first thought is, so the physiological changes that happen that lets us know that you are growing, that you're developing as a human being. But then I also think these more subtle life cycles that might not necessarily bring big changes in your physical appearance, yet they are transforming and developing you in a different way. And something as simple as, for example, you graduate college and now you go from being a student to being an employee or having your own business. You go from being single to being married, if that's what you choose. So it'd be changes in life that do bring change and transformation that do go beyond the physical appearance of who you are. Um, so I just wanted to mention that because I think that sometimes, at least for me, coming from science, I always go to life cycle growth and development. And especially for females, like you hit puberty, now and you're pregnant. Oh, now is menopause and postmenopausal, right? And those like really big changes. But it sounds like today, as we set the stage, we're going to be talking a little bit more than just that.
Right. We're talking more about those subtle changes, and some of those physical changes are fixed time sets. And we all may hit puberty at a slightly different age. We may all hit menopause at a slightly different age. Those are set in our body, but we have this kind of nature and nurture, right? The way we're born and the way things are going to happen. But we other things are in our choices and in our environment. And those things about getting married. Someone might do it at 22 and someone might do it at 42. Some might do it again at 72. Right? So those other things are not set, right? We get to continue to revisit and evolve and decide what we want to do in our life. I think that's a powerful difference as well. We have this part that is the part of us that is going to happen. It's the way we're born and the way that our body changes. And then this part that is our choice and we participate in. And we want to make friends with both of those.
Make friends. I love that because I feel that sometimes when change happens, one of the things that we can do consciously or subconsciously is try to change it, try to fix it. We don't feel comfortable with the change. And can I control it? Can I change it? Even if that is not possible. Let's start to put these together. So, if you are working right with one of your, let's just say a mom and a daughter arrive to you and they come, and let's say that the daughter is classical teenager. She is an athlete at school. She is in this process of perhaps maybe starting to date, and she's starting to explore the world. And sometimes as a teenager and school and you're an athlete, that can be also a little bit tricky. And maybe she has started to have these thoughts about herself and her appearance, even thought she is really good in the sports that she practices. She is really good at school. She has wonderful friends, but yet maybe she's being bullied at school. And mom is struggling because mom doesn't know how to best help her daughter. Let's just say that they're there with you. What is it that you do? And how is it that you would want to help mom and the daughter deal with the changes that are happening? Because now she's a teenager. Her body, yes, is different, but then she is in high school, going to go to college, which also means life by itself changes. And how do we just help them? Where do we start?
That's a great question. It sounds like a lot like myself as a teenager, and also a lot like a number of the athletes that I work with, who many of them are high school girls who are dealing with bodily changes and trying to shore up their confidence. And whenever I was a teenager, I was definitely exactly what you described as one of those high achieving, top of the class. I was actually second in my class and president of everything. And from the outside, outside, it definitely looked like I had everything together. And
Mm,
these things were important to me. I was excited to learn, but there was also this lack of self-esteem or this unsure of myself. And so whenever whenever crisis happened, as it did whenever I went to college and my parents filed for divorce, then my father became ill with
Mhm.
cancer, and then he passed away early in my college years, in my sophomore year, because I didn't have the coping mechanisms, because I didn't have that confidence in myself and that kind of positive body image or positive image of myself, things began to crumble and I began to turn to maladaptive coping mechanisms, I would say. In other words, things that didn't really help me, but made me feel like I was establishing some control of my life. And those things were
Mhm.
eating disorders, of over exercising and under fueling in a way to just bring some kind of control to what felt very out of control.
Mhm.
And it led to me becoming very ill. What I now can look back and see that it was probably red S, which is relative energy deficiency syndrome, where you literally
Mhm.
are just overtraining and under fueling. And it's something that's often done simply through lack of knowledge by athletes, but also other people as well. And I ended up having a number of health issues that later would launch me searching for a way to heal my body and my mind and becoming aware that I needed to make some kind of shift in the way I was taking care of myself. So that's something I share with athletes as well. What I see is that, especially maybe these young girls pre puberty, boys and girls tend to perform, they can perform about the same level up to about the age of 12 when puberty starts. After that point, boys are just stacking on muscle and testosterone and growth, whereas girls are going in this up and down fluctuation of putting on little some body fat as when shifting shape
Mhm.
of their body. All these things are changing, and thus their performance can change as well. Maybe they see plateaus in their performance, and so often may turn that on themselves and assume that it's their own fault. Right? There's something wrong with me. I'm not as good as I thought. It's because I'm now fat or I don't look like these other people do. And these are the words in their mind, of course, not in our mind.
Right.
And it becomes very difficult to sort through those thoughts. So the first thing we do is, first of all, educate them a little bit about what does the natural trajectory of that body and performance look like over time? How does a female's pathway to success look, right? And what does a normal pathway to success look like? It's full of ups and downs. And over time, you see this, it's not a linear path, right? Over time, you see this upward trend. But in between, if you zoom in, it's up and down and spiraling backwards. And so they need to have this different understanding of what progress looks like and what success looks like. And then the second thing is working. Sometimes I am lucky to have the parent and the child, and
Mm.
that we can really, what a way to strengthen those bonds to really both grow in their understanding. And we want to understand is that we want to make sure we're not creating an environment for ourselves or for our child where there's a worth contingency. And what that means is that somehow that child feels like that I am only worthwhile if, right? If I bring home the grades, if I continue to improve, if I win this, if I achieve this goal I set for myself, then I'm worthwhile. And it's certainly not something a parent's going to probably voice that in that way, but it can be picked up in that environment. And so we have to understand it and then be careful of the way we frame success, right? So it's very easy to look at these maybe potential college scholarships, or you could go to state, or you could make varsity, or you could do this, right? There's so many opportunities. It can be easy to be caught up in this worth contingency without really realizing it. And then that can really have a negative impact on how we view ourselves. So that would be definitely an area I would work in.
Yeah. So you said a couple of things that I want to come back to. So one is turning against yourself. And I use the term self-contempt, right? Where something has happened that you start to, I am bad. And that can look at thoughts that you have about yourself. But that can also look like self-destructive behavior that can even be very subtle. So not necessarily like self-harm, but it can look very subtle, like I am going to let go of some of the things that I even like to do and enjoy to do because I don't even know if I'm worth it. right? If I'm worth
Exactly.
doing this, if I'm worth that goodness, if I am truly that beautiful or that smart or whatever it is that they're struggling with. But I think that's very important because if we do not address that self content or that turning against yourself, I feel that in the healing process, and there's so much more work that will need to be done until that self contempt yourself usually comes from a place of shame. And all human beings experience and feel shame at one point. Then it makes the rest of the work a little bit more harder. The normal pathway. When I think of that is um, that there is good in having access to TV and social media and magazines and books. We don't want to live in a bubble. But I also believe that sometimes the messages that we can receive from world or from the culture can make us feel that unless we look, behave, dress, smell, have the latest shoes that are out there, whatever it's like the latest trend, that somehow we don't fit in, we're not good enough. So there's something again wrong with us because we are not fitting that box that sometimes, again, culture puts in. Yet sometimes, and that's when you were talking about the word contingency. Sometimes these messages, unfortunately, can come from family members or even friends. And then I think that the wounds, when it comes from a family member, especially, can be very deep in terms of then us being able to rewire those thoughts. And it's not until we rewire the thoughts at a very deep level of who I am and the soul that then it would be reflected on like my behavior and how I interact with the world. So I think that those were like three awesome good points that I just wanted to come back and just state my own thought, even that I'm not an expert on this, but my own thoughts and what I know with some of like the trauma training that I have done that I incorporate into my patient care that I think that is important and worth mentioning. So anything that you want to say there?
Yeah, sure. Well done. Well done. Very good points, actually. I think they're wonderful that you made. And yeah, so a couple that I would say one is that you mentioned having some of these deeper ingrained experiences that might have some wounds on a little bit deeper level and can take time in order to let them go, whether that is from what we call like big T trauma or little T trauma, right? It's not necessarily one thing. For some people, it might be one traumatic event. For others, it might just be these little things over time that build up, but we can also understand it an iceberg, right? So we have some of these deeper things that are under the surface of the water that we might not even be very conscious of. But the exciting thing, Maria, that I learned again when I was very young was that I don't necessarily have to solve it all at once. I can
Mhm.
recognize that maybe there is a lot under there and I have a lot that I need to work through. But I can begin to, just by bringing my awareness to it, I can begin to experience shifts in my mindset and my well being really right away. And then also know that as I continue to live my life, as I continue to bring awareness to things that are going on, that we continue to learn, I can slowly find more and more things letting go. So I like to think of it as letting go in layers, right? And we don't
Mhm.
have to wait for everything to let go to be healed. It's not a once and done. It's really just keep chipping away. And the good news is you really can experience those little bumps in your well-being and your mindset just immediately by just bringing awareness to it. So I
Yeah.
love that.
Yes. And I like that you said the layers because that makes me think of when you start to peel an onion.
Mm,
Sometimes tears start to come out, you can't control them, and you need to stop. And I think that healing can be like that, right? It's like peeling this onion. If there's too much filling on, let's stop, let's take a break. And then we come back to the onion and we continue doing the onion.
right.
No reason to rush it. We have time. So let's shift a little bit. We talked about the teenager and some of the things that sometimes teenage girls struggle with. And then let's talk a little bit more about moms. And I want to, for me, I have found when I work with women that these two stages or events in life tend to be a little bit, ooh, what happened here and what do I do? One of them is pregnancy. And with pregnancy, the changes that come into the body, but not only that, the changes that come into the lifestyle, which, yes, a lot of moms are like, oh my God, this is the best thing, especially when they have their first baby. But it also comes with lack of sleep, feeling tired, more responsibility, right? It's a change. It's a change. And then they're moms, and then all of a sudden is, oh, they're gone from the home
Mhm.
and
Yes.
just her. And then that also brings a little bit, what do I do with my life now? It brings a change even for working moms or for working women. And usually it comes at the same time that they are starting to experience estrogen decline, whether that is late perimenopause, menopause. So I feel that they come together. Let's tackle the first life cycle change, which is the changes that pregnancy bring not only to their like body, but again to their lifestyle, to what life is going to look like. What are some things that perhaps can help our listeners maybe adapt to this other change that will happen for those that choose to be moms?
No, that's a great question. And dealing with change, right? That's the underlying idea is we're dealing with change and all the emotions and thoughts that it can bring up. And I think you brought up a great point in that some people might just relish all the changes that come with pregnancy and they seem to just glow and they seem to just fall into that natural motherhood state. They seem to their baby sleeps 12 hours at a time and their milk comes in perfectly and they never have a problem. This was not me. So I struggled. I was not getting any sleep. My milk was terrible. My first child, I had to supplement her whenever I in my mind I thought I was going to do it perfectly, right? It was going to be all just natural, organic. And I remember trying to make her own baby food, and I boiled some beets and then I blended some beets, and it was the most messiest thing I ever did with those red beets. And then she hated it, right? And felt like a failure in a many ways. And so all those emotions of self-judgment came up. I
Mm,
should be feeling this way. I should be able to do this, right? Because everyone else is doing this who's a good mom. So we have these preconceived notions of how that change is going to look for us. Maybe we've even been looking forward to it, but suddenly it's not meeting up to the expectations that we had. We're exhausted, we're irritable, whatever might show up for you, or things just not going the way you thought. And so, just managing change is first about being real with yourself and acknowledging what is showing up for you in a compassionate way. So, I'll give you just a nice acronym that might help people just put something into practice that again could also be for any stage in your life, but particularly when you're in a time of great uncertainty and change and a lot of emotions. And that's just the stop practice. I didn't make this up. This is probably out there, but maybe people have heard of it. But it's a nice reminder if you have not. And that's to think of STOP. And S is simply to remind yourself to stop for a moment or to pause, right? The power of the pause. Simply to pause and for a moment to allow yourself some space between what is showing up for you and your reaction to that, right?
mm,
We all have different reactions. So we can just take a moment to pause, to stop. And then T, to just take a breath, right? Breath is so powerful. And a breath is always in the moment because we can't breathe the prior breath and we can't breathe the next breath. We can only breathe this breath. So, by simply taking a breath or allowing a breath to arise, and then to gently just allow the breath to let go and maybe release some of that physical tension that comes with that stress and uncertainty and all that stuff, right? It would naturally start to tense up. So take a breath, exhale, and just drop tension. Just
mm.
relax your face, relax your shoulders. Just, I guarantee there's some there and you can find it. And then O is simply observe. observe what is showing up for you right now. You might notice it as if you were standing outside of your body looking in and notice. And you can even say it in that way instead of, I am so tired. You might say, I am noticing that I am feeling really tired today. Or I am noticing my stress level is going up. I'm
Mhm,
noticing I'm feeling more irritated today than usual. And so I'm just noticing, I'm observing what is happening in the situation around me. I'm noticing my child is just not sleeping the way I really was hoping that she would, or things are not going the way I was hoping that they would. And so I'm noticing I'm feeling pretty disappointed about that. Right. So by simply adding those couple extra words, it gives us a little room, it pulls that emotion back slightly, turns the volume just slightly down so that maybe we can take care of ourselves in that moment of observing. We can separate just slightly to create some space for a different response. And then finally, P is it. I can give a little bit of a different look on this P. Sometimes it's just proceed, right? Just stop, take a breath, observe what's going on, and then just continue on with your day. And that's perfectly fine. If that's right for you, you just needed to pause and now you proceed. But it might also be pivot. It might be that you were starting to get really frustrated and maybe biting heads off of people around you, or starting to just really feel like you just wanted to get back in bed and not do anything. And you know that wouldn't make you feel better. So you decide you're going to pivot. You're going to choose a different direction, right? You're going to do something maybe to help yourself move forward.
mhm,
Maybe you need to call a friend. You were heading to go just curl up in a corner, and maybe instead you need to connect. Maybe you need to go get some exercise, go take the baby for a walk or take yourself for a walk, right? It gives us a chance to either proceed or to pivot and choose a different way. So I think that can help us by over and over taking a moment to notice what's going on. We can notice our reactions, then we can apply this kind of self care, this encouragement that can help us move forward in a way that is supportive of ourselves.
yeah, I love that. The stop, love that. And and one of the things that I loved about that was when you say when you take a breath, you're in the present.
Mhm,
Breathing is always living in the present, and I feel that a lot of that what we do is when we don't breathe well, and
mhm,
2, we just don't live well in the present. That's simply as it is. The other thing when you were talking about failure and self-judgment, and I am by no means I am a mom, so I haven't had kids of my own. I have nieces and nephews. Yet, when you were talking about failure and self-judgment, one of the things that came to my mind is when sometimes women are maybe taught or they hear or culturally it is expected that the mom's instinct is going to kick in and therefore you are going to know exactly what to do and how to do it. And the reality is that is not true. When I my first couple of years in medicine, my first 4, years after finishing residency, I practiced full spectrum family medicine, so that means that I deliver babies, and I was with moms through their pregnancy, delivering their baby, and afterwards, and I just wanna say, if you have ever felt the pressure because that mom instinct will kick in and you're supposed to know what to do and how to do it, and even though learning how to breastfeed, that's a process. The reality is, I saw some moms struggle with that process and how hard that can be, but I feel that part of it is because of this message, the mother instinct is supposed to kick in, which it just it doesn't. Do you understand what I'm saying?
yes, absolutely, and like I said, for some people, it may be more natural. Things may just flow. That's not necessarily that they're doing anything right, it's just we're all different, right? Our experience is different, and so acknowledging your experience, I always said my child was my yoga, right? I just looked at it as this because it was difficult sometimes, and it brought up a lot of that self-judgment, self-criticism that we can look at it as a way that, "Hey, I'm learning as I go." So we can frame it in a different way instead of I need to be perfect or I should be feeling this. When we hear those words, should, need, must, we already know we're in that space of self judgment, maybe in that perfectionism mindset. My child should be perfect. I should be a perfect mom. So we know we're in that space that's probably not very helpful for us. And my question would be, how does that feel on your motivation? How does it feel on your well being? And if you can recognize, I think most answers, I know mine would be not so great. I usually get in a pretty big funk whenever I'm in that space. So we can recognize and be like, oh, yeah, I'm in that perfectionist mindset, or I'm in that inner critic is really loud. And then we can shift and we can just simply be our inner coach, our inner friend instead. Like if
Mhm.
you were talking to a friend in your shoes, what would you say to that friend? You probably would not use that voice and that tone that you're using with yourself. And you wouldn't use those words. You'd probably say something like, it is okay. You're doing just fine. Your child is beautiful and going to turn out just great. Why don't you let me help you for a minute and go take a break? Right? It's all these things. We'd probably bring them cookies or buy them a Starbucks coffee or something. So we would be so much kinder. And if we can see that we actually have both of these things inside of us, the inner critic who just wants us to be perfect, but it's not very helpful, and the inner coach who wants to help us grow and learn, we can shift those voices. We don't have to make the inner critic disappear. Instead, we can recognize when it shows up and shift to a different voice and feel that support and then allow ourselves to grow and learn because that's what we're doing, just like our child.
Yeah, I love that. Are you listening to the inner critic or the inner coach? You have the power to choose. Yes. So now let's talk about this last the mom had the baby, took care of the baby is out of the home. So the empty nester female that at the same time is having her estrogen decline and all of the other changes that brings. Whether she is still out and working or not, but how would you help her deal with I feel that at this stage, there's a lot of loss that is not necessarily what we think of the typical loss of losing a loved one. But there is the loss of the kids not being at home and that what that brings, the loss of, well, my body starts to change and I'm not anymore in those reproductive years. How would you help this woman deal with loss that is natural, will happen?
Good question. Things are all so familiar for myself. I certainly struggled through them all, and I've been my best learning ground for myself. I speak from definitely from that experience as well. But the first thing is to just pause, of course, and recognize what's showing up and what is happening here, what you're feeling, and how it's affecting you. How is it making you? How's it affecting your well being? How's it affecting your motivation to do things? Just give yourself that time to grieve so that in the grief process, which there's that 5-stage grief cycle, right? That has like denial and anger and all these pieces of it. If you are familiar with it, which I think many people are, we know that it's not a linear cycle. It's not stage one, stage two, stage three, right? We can all experience any of the stages at any time and they can cycle back and we can repeat stages. So understanding that loss is a grief process. I work with a lot of athletes who maybe deal with a major injury and have to question if they'll be able to continue their sport. That is also a very similar in a lot of studies, the same kind of process can go on with this grief process. And so we have to allow time for that. So we need to just zoom out and get a little bigger perspective. Like, this is happening. I recognize that I am grieving and I'm going to give myself room for this to happen. And then the second thing I would say is that we often talk about athlete identity with athletes, but it's the same for anyone. It could be a work identity or anything, or mother identity, anything that we have strongly identified with for a long time, built our life around, can have a very profound impact whenever that thing suddenly changes or disappears. So, like I mentioned, for an athlete who might be transitioning out of their sport for one reason or another, might feel a great sense of loss. For somebody who has been working and they go into retirement, which they might have thought was going to be just this beautiful just floating off into happiness, and suddenly they're feeling depressed, or a parent who is now shifting to be an empty nester. So any of these changes where we're losing a big part of our identity, we have to take a moment to broaden our horizon and see who else we are. We're not just one thing. We're not just a mom, but perhaps that's all you've been focusing on. But we'll pull back and say, what else is in your orbit, right? What else are you? You could probably name that you're not only a mom, but maybe a wife, maybe, right? Maybe you're a daughter somewhere. Maybe you still have a parent alive. I don't know. Maybe you're a sister to someone, a friend. Maybe you volunteer at church. Maybe you're a volunteer at school. You're a volunteer. You could continue to volunteer. Maybe you're a pet lover. You have this time to, I spend a lot more time on the trail running with my dog now. So we have to discover these other pieces. Maybe you love arts, crafts, creativity. So discovering who else we are can start to build some excitement, and that, wow, I can shift and now expand on these other areas that I've been putting off. But it takes a little pause before we can just make that sudden shift.
Yeah, and I like that you address it from the perspective of identity, of who I am, and not that necessarily it was done purposefully, but I think that it it's much easier for female than males to get a little bit lost in terms of taking care of everybody else, and then all of a sudden, and not only kids, right? If you have a spouse, you're taking care of the spouse. Sometimes then they're also taking care of their elderly parents. And it's then taking care of everybody else, and then all of a sudden is, oh, all of this other things have disappeared, and then who I am. And they have forgotten to, it's almost like they have forgotten to be with themselves and what are the other things that are beautiful about them than just perhaps serving others or giving towards others. So thank you for mentioning that. So as we come towards the conclusion, and we have been like talking about different like avatars, the teenager, the woman that now has chosen motherhood and is experiencing these changes, the woman that now is an empty nester, or even the woman that even if she never chose to be a mom and she's not going through that empty nester, she still won't go through menopause, right? It's like puberty. If you're a woman, you will go through those two purities in your life. So, what are the last? I would say the last three nuggets that you would want to share with any female that is listening to us about their body image from this positive perspective, whole person well-being that they can take with them today.
Thanks for asking. First of all, I'd say that I think you brought this up earlier about all the messages that come in from the culture, from social media, from we just pick up along the way of the way we think things should look. And often things look easy, they look perfect. We often will see people, even if they've gone through a struggle, we often see it after the struggle. So then everything, so we hear about it when now you look fine. So we pick up these kind of messages, and we tend to develop often a fix it mindset. That's what sells products, right? If you try this, then you will get this, right? Just try this one thing and everything will be taken care of. So we have this fix it mentality. And because we want to do our best, we want to be our best, we want to do hard things, we want to succeed. So we're like, just tell me what's wrong and I'll fix it. But that's not necessarily the best mindset for helping us stay motivated over the lifetime to continue to help ourselves. So if we can move from a fix it mindset to a helpful support self-care mindset, and instead of how do I fix this problem, how do I support myself in a way that helps me move through this problem, right?
Mhm.
So it's like looking at grit, which is Angela Duckworth has a great book called Grit, and did a lot of research on what grit is. And she talked about grit being this like being willing to persevere through a lot of difficulty and keep moving towards your goals. But since that book, she has even acknowledged that it's really another part of that grit is not just pushing ourselves to always do more or do better. But the other component is also being able to pull back, called grace and grit, being able to apply self compassion. So I want you to take away to notice when you're in that fix it mindset and move to that more compassionate mindset that gives yourself the high five, that gives yourself the hug when you need it, and gives yourself the encouragement that helps you then get back in there and do what you want to do, right? If you're wanting to go make lifestyle changes, how do you need to support yourself, encourage yourself, and be compassionate with yourself in a way that helps you feel motivated to make changes? Right? Instead of pushing, judging, and criticizing your way there, which doesn't tend to last very long. And the last nugget would be that just recognize that, just like I mentioned earlier, change comes in small steps over time, like layers, like steps. We need to understand that we want to pull back and see the bigger picture. So, how can you define success for yourself? We feel best whenever, even when someone just tells us, great job, we're not even sure what the great job, just the words feel so good. So how can we find that great job mentality for ourselves? How can
Mhm.
you define success? Is it just that sometimes it's that I got up today and I got dressed and fixed my bed, even though I did not feel like it? Great job, right? We've got to have those high five moments for ourselves in order to propel ourselves to that next step. So start small, find the smallest thing that you feel you definitely can do for yourself in a positive way. Maybe it's pausing for a cup of tea, maybe it's getting out the door to do something. But find those small wins and give yourself a high five in some way, give yourself a hug. Give yourself that positive reinforcement that helps you stay motivated to continue along the path that is a lifetime journey. We always said, as a yoga teacher, yoga is a lifetime practice, not a 60-minute practice. And we need to
Right.
see things that way. So I
Mm.
hope people will take that away to support
Yeah.
themselves and to focus on small wins over time.
Yes, I love that. I'm going to call it the GG, or do you have GG? Grit and grace. And it's not, yeah, yeah, and it's not only having it. I think that it's also it takes some learning to know how to be like the waves of the ocean. I'm going to go into grit. I'm going to go into grace, right? And feel very comfortable going into those. Um, so thank you for being here. Now, my last question for you is if anybody is listening to the chat today and says, oh my God, I think that she can help me. How can we get a hold of you? What would be the best way for them to get a hold of you?
But that would be great. I love working with individuals. I love working with groups. I love speaking to organizations. So I would love to speak to yours. And you can reach me. You can find me, first of all, information about me at presentmomentmindset.com. It's my website. You could reach me at Michelle at presentmomentmindset.com. You could email me there. You could also find me on Facebook. It's facebook.com/presentmomentmindset. And on LinkedIn, I believe my profile is Michelle-Gregovich 108. And so I try to post on LinkedIn as well. And if you reach out to me there and have any discussions, you could look for me on Instagram as well. But that one's I do a little bit of business and just personal as well there. I try to keep it fun and light. And but definitely reach out to me, and just even if you just have questions or want to talk more about a topic, or I can help you. I love doing that.
Thank you. And just for our listeners, do not worry. I will put all the details in the show notes so you can get in contact with Michelle. Thank you for listening to today. I hope that this was helpful. And if this was helpful to you, just share the episode with a family member or a friend that you know that would benefit from hearing today's conversation. Until next time, I hope that we have a wonderful day. Thank you, lady. Bye.